Yes, let people roll in. Hi, welcome in, and feel free as you're coming in to introduce yourself in the chat and maybe tell us where you're from. Nice to see everybody rolling in here. Give it a moment for people to come on in and then we'll get started. Oh, I saw someone from Redlands coming in. My family has been in Redlands, I think, for 6 generations now. It's nice to see all these different spots, all these different places around the state coming in.
All over the place. I saw someone from Ojai. That's where I was born.
You're from Ojai. It seems like you would be an Ohioan, but that seems wrong.
Right. Ohioan or Ohioan.
Ohioan. All right. Well, thanks for spending your evening with us. Well, oops, accidentally hit the wrong piece here. We'll get going in just a moment once the numbers settle in for just a second. I saw at least one more from Ojai go through.
Another from Ojai.
Tucson, Arizona. Got a couple of people from out of state even.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll go ahead and give it one more moment and then get going. As you're introducing yourself, feel free to use the chat to talk to each other throughout this. There is a lot of knowledge in this room. Feel free to use the Q&A to ask questions of us, and we'll, if we catch them, we'll sprinkle them throughout. And if not, when we get to the end, if we have time, we'll make sure to catch up on all the questions. At the end of this, you will get an email with all the resources and with some follow-up pieces that might answer some of those questions as well. We aren't going to be doing raised hands or allowing people to speak when we've got hundreds of people. It just gets messy. But we'll try to get to everything we can. And we look forward to having you all talk to each other too. All right. Going to go ahead and get started here. And feel free to keep introducing yourself and keep connecting through the chat. All right, I'm Anne Marie Benz. I'm the Horticulture Programs Manager for CNPS, which means I'm dealing with a lot of things in the built environment. And if you've been to these Naturehood talks before, you've probably met Maya and Jen, who are the normal co-hosts on here. But tonight we have a special guest co-hosting here with Barbara from our staff.
Hi, everyone. I am Barbara Lazan. I'm the membership manager at California Native Plant Society. So I may have talked to some of you before on the phone or over email. It's great to have so many folks on tonight. This is really exciting for me, being a first-time co-host. And since we have so many people interested in tonight's topic, I wanted to share a little bit about how we are able to bring this type of event to you. And here's a hint, it's because of our members. We have almost 13,000 members across California and other states and even in other countries, believe it or not. And that membership number is growing year after year. We just keep growing by leaps and bounds. It's pretty incredible to me. And, you know, when you think about why, when I walk around my neighborhood, and I'm sure some of you do this too, you may have noticed that native plants are kind of taking off the last few years. I see neighbors ripping out their yards, their grass, and putting in, you know, beautiful native plant gardens or just landscaping with native plants. And I just think that Californians are starting to realize that we have to change our mindset a little bit when it comes to yards and gardens, and incorporate, not just water-wise plants, but native plants that support ecosystems that are here in California. I mean, you all know that, that's why you're here. But I think more people are getting that. And across our state, not just here where I am in Sacramento, but, out in the mountains, in the coasts and the deserts and the foothills everywhere, we've got to protect the biodiversity, the unique biodiversity that California has. And again, I think people are starting to key in on that a little bit more. And so, of course, CNPS strives to do that, right? Protect the lands and the plants, but also educate communities, just like we're doing tonight. Educate people about native plants and how they can use them and where to buy them and all of those great things. And I have to say that we could not do that without our members. I mean, they are absolutely the heart and soul of what CNPS does. It's how we can do the things that we do with our members, for our members, and because of our members. They really make it all possible. So if you are a member, thank you. Here's a shout out to you. And if you're not, I'm hoping that at the end of this webinar, you might be interested and you might consider becoming a member. So that I can send you a letter saying welcome to CNPS. And memberships start at just $50 a year, pretty reasonable price for all you get, or $5 a month if you're more of one of those monthly givers that likes a smaller amount. And what you get as a member are subscriptions to our 2 publications, Flora magazine, which is phenomenal and has so much great information in it, and Artemisia, which is our scientific journal, which also, for folks who really love data and really digging into the science, that is a great publication. You also get an affiliation with your local chapter, and that includes everything that the local chapters put out for members, events and activities, plant sales, and just the connections with other people who are out there. And then discounts at participating nurseries. The list goes on, but those are the main things that members seem to love about the benefits they get. So think about it. And if you're excited at the end of the webinar, we will have a QR code link that you can click on with your phone, and it'll take you right to our membership information that you can read more about. If for some reason you can't stick around till the end of the program, that's totally fine. You can always find that information on our website, which is cnps.org. Anyway, if you have any questions about membership, I would love to answer them, and I will be here enjoying the event just like you will. So thank you for letting me share just a little bit, and I think I'll hand it back over to Anne Marie.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks for being here. Thanks for co-hosting. And thanks to all of you who are spending your evening with us. We are going to talk about maintenance and having a balanced garden and what that looks like with native plants. So for those of you who weren't here when we said it before, this is being recorded. You will get a follow-up email in a few days with a list of resources. There's a Q&A here that we will try to get to if we have time at the end. And in the meantime, feel free to both introduce yourself in the chat and to discuss in the chat. A lot of people in this group have deep knowledge, and so feel free to talk to each other through it. And if you watch this going on, people are coming from all over the state, and it's really nice to have that representation here. We like keeping this free and available to as many people as possible. We do this every month on the first Thursday of the month from 5:30 to 6:30. And the recordings of this are available on the CNPS YouTube page as well. So maintenance in the role of a native plant garden is different than in a normal yard, in that you're not planning on mowing, you're not planning on edging the grasses, the things that often people think of. It is more like a relationship and understanding the seasons of your garden. And a wise person once told me the best thing you can put on your garden is your shadow. So we're going to talk about the parts where you're looking at your garden, you're watching it grow, some basic pieces of your garden, and then kind of some resources that are available and out there to help support all the different things you can do with maintenance in a garden. So gardens change over time. You may have come into a fully established garden. You may be just looking at what it would take to change out a yard into a garden and questioning what that's going to take. And so we're going to walk through the steps of different gardens as they grow and what that looks like for a maintenance regimen, what it looks like for how much time you're putting into it, irrigation, some basic pieces like that. There's a rule of thumb, as it says here, native gardens, they sleep, creep, and then leap. Their first year, they sleep. They're kind of doing a lot of the work underground, getting into it. Then second year, they start creeping around and kind of pushing out. And then the third year is when you really see them leap. And the third year, and from there on, is when you start working as a mature garden. And these different steps give you different opportunities to engage with your garden and then to grow with it as well. So your first year, if you're coming into a garden, you are likely, this is the year you design, you do your site prep, you turn in rebates, you do your preliminary installation, and then you're working with your baby garden. So your first year is when you are looking at sheet mulching. You've got all the big plans, you have plant lists, hopefully you have a relationship with a nursery near you, and you've done this whole process, you're starting with your baby garden. And your baby garden is going to take a little bit more hands-on time. It's going to take having regular, shadow on the ground kind of thing. It's your muddy boots opportunity to really get to know your garden and to help support it growing in. It's giving it mulch, it's learning its growth patterns, it's watching as you start having pollinators and birds come into the yard. One of the most rewarding parts of having a new garden is that first time that you see a bird on the tree, or the first time that you watch the butterfly flitter through your garden and realize why you've done that. It's the exciting time to have that opportunity to see the change in what's happening. A second year garden is a garden that's starting to creep. It's a garden you're starting to see where everything goes. You're starting to see how it's going to form, what's going to happen with different pieces. If you've integrated it with with pieces of a previous garden, you're seeing how they grow in together. Does something work if it's growing under a shade tree? You're really spending the time adjusting and taking a look as it's sprawling out on what's going to be happening. This is the time to start considering if with wildflowers, are you going to let them reseed themselves? Do you want to pinch back your perennials? We'll go into details on some of these pieces later on in the talk. It's when you start really forming how the garden is going to look. You're learning it, and you're also kind of doing the adjustments, checking your irrigation systems, rechecking if they're in the right spacing now, making sure that if you have tree rings around trees that you're planting, that they're adjusting out. A second year is kind of like having a teenager, where you're a little bit more, you don't have to be hands-on in the same way, but you have to be very aware in a lot of ways. You're looking at your spacing as everything's growing in. Are they too close? Is there something that has died off that didn't make it the first year and you want to replant? It's time to cull those. You're starting to get weeds in. Weeding will be something that you want to learn to be very meditative about and to enjoy, because it will constantly be with you. It's an opportunity to remulch, and particularly to re-sheet mulch any areas that you need to go back over where you're starting to see old things come up, or you're starting to see too many weeds in a particular area. You want to go ahead and re-sheet mulch those spaces. And you want to also restake any trees that you have, give them an opportunity to grow into their stakes and an opportunity to spread out as they need to. If you have rain gardens, if you have water features, if you have things like that, your second year is when you're starting to set up that what you need to clean out, what is really going in, all those pieces. The second year is your opportunity to form your garden into where it's what you really want it to be. It's also the time where you're going to start seeing if the plants that you put thinking they were all in the same type of irrigation zone, if that's really true, or is something not thriving because it has too much or too little water. Your third year, this is when you really start to see it come into its own. A third year garden is the baby adult garden. It's fully grown, it's on its own. It may not be paying for its own phone yet, or maybe it's not paying its own Netflix, but overall it's kind of a grown garden. This is when you should have a really good sense of how it's going to look long term. You'll know if you need to replant. You'll know if you have something that needs to be pulled out. It's just not working in that space for whatever the variety of reasons. A third year garden is your opportunity to really start having the experience of your new landscape. A third year garden is going to be where you start setting up how often you want to check in on different parts of your landscape also. What are your mulch needs in different areas? Do you need to, if you have water features, reroute the hardscape or the pieces that are in it? As you start doing your third year pieces, you're starting to know what plants are going to not be grown into the size that you thought they were. You thought you were getting a Chihuahua plant and it's a little more towards the Burmese mountain dog, and maybe that isn't the right spacing. So a third year garden, as we talk through some of these pieces, is when you really have the garden that you were hoping to have, and it's your opportunity to really form those final bits. In your third year maintenance is those opportunities to replant. It's also when you start seeing more opportunities for bugs, and that's good bugs, bad bugs. We have a couple months ago and in our YouTube folder, a really good talk on good bugs and bad bugs. And so you're starting to notice and learn whether you need to do some integrated pest management, whether the bugs that are coming in, you should have good nibbled leaves. Are they out of control? Are they out of balance? You're starting to check, how they're interacting with your garden. And it's also a really good time to, now that it's grown in, review your irrigation and reset your controllers, because you're not having a growing in garden. You have a long-term garden that should be really ready to go. You want to make sure that you're giving that garden the support it needs and not the support of a younger garden. All right, and your year 4, this is year 4 on long-term maintenance. This is where you start to work on pruning it. This is where you start really showing it off as well. This is where you want to take photos and photo document your garden. You want to put things on iNaturalist. You want to get on garden tours if it's going the way you want to do. It's where you start noticing what thrives in that location. You thought you knew it was going to thrive. This is your opportunity to really know what is going to go really well in that space. And this is your opportunity to really engage long-term with how you're going to use that space. You may have thought you were going to use it for, for coffee areas or something else, and you need to adjust how you actually interact with your garden. Year 4 maintenance is kind of where you set up your on repeat, where you're going to go in, and we'll talk about these details of what is, checking your irrigation, what is pruning. It's your ongoing maintenance piece isn't happening in year 4. So we're going to talk about how irrigation changes over time. There's a bit of a misnomer or a misconception that native plants and native gardens don't need any irrigation. Native plants in their native environment are set up to work with the precipitation patterns that you have. They're set up to work with your climate, with your heat, with your cold, with your dry, with whatever you have. However, once we've put them into a landscape, into a garden, they're no longer in quite their same native habitat. They're still the best adjusted for your precipitation, for your weather, but they may need more support. They're often surrounded by hardscapes. They often have heat issues going on. There's a lot more that happens there than if they were in their wild situation. So irrigation, while they are much lower irrigation needs, they do still need some support, and particularly when we have, as we often are, drought happening with them. So your first year irrigation, the first year you had done all your planning, you'd done your sheet mulching, you'd installed your baby plants, and along with all that, you install your irrigation. What you're trying to do once you install those plants is you're trying to encourage your healthy root systems. You're trying to get them well established, give them the opportunity to really grow in. And it's really watching what they need and how they're responding to what you're giving them. You want to give them the opportunity for their roots to go deeper, for them to get good solid holds on the ground there, and to give them a good base to grow into. So you want to be watching them as well. You want to have your shadow on them regularly. You want to be able to go out there on a semi-regular basis and see if something isn't working. Are they getting too much or too little water? Is the water feature that you thought was going to work so well actually overflowing, and now during flooding that particular area overflows? Those type of things. So you want the opportunity to go out and to really interact with these baby plants and to give them plenty of water to support what's happening with them. And then year 2, when they're starting to creep, you want to check if it's a wet winter or a dry winter. Are you in an area that's getting a lot less precipitation than normal, or are you getting more? Is it, are you going to adjust to those pieces? You want to make sure and find kind of an indicator plant in each planted zone and check up on them. Make sure that you've got an idea of your canary in your coal mine and how they're doing. It's your opportunity to readjust any pieces as they're growing a little bit bigger. This is where you readjust any spacing needs around things like the, if you have tree rings that you're irrigating with. Your year 2 irrigation is giving them their final year of really good long-term, deep support. And your year 3 irrigation, when they're starting to really bloom into themselves, is when it should feel like you kind of got this down. You want to keep checking in on it. You want to check your soil moisture. You want to check your conditions, depending on if you're having a drought in your area, if you're experiencing it that year, if you've had a particularly hot year, those types of things. You also want to readjust it if things in your landscape have changed. Have they put up a large building next door and now suddenly all those sun-loving plants that needed that kind of support are in shade? Make sure that you're kind of adjusting as they go. Your year 3 irrigation should be getting set further apart. If you have an irrigation system with a controller, most smart controllers at least, will allow you to set 14 days apart, 21 days apart, and give you an opportunity to do a deeper cycle and soak. And your year 4, this one isn't quite a fair picture. It's not a landscape that needs irrigation. It just was too lush and pretty to pass up for this part. Year 4 irrigation is the opportunity for everything should be pretty solid. This is where you start to just have regular checkups, check any parts that are leaking, make sure if you've had a rodent chew through something, they do that. Check your timing, check regular pieces, but you're no longer quite having to be the same type of hands-on with making sure that your irrigation is working. You adjust it seasonally, you know your garden at this point, you know what's working and what isn't, and you've adjusted any spacing on your plants, any hydrozoning that wasn't quite the right one. You should have that all down at this point. And so it is knowing your garden and really giving it an opportunity. And then also if you're, the final piece, if you're doing this in sections, or if you're replacing plants, if you're adding sections, if you're adding plants in, those new plants are a year one baby. So that plant or that section is a beginning irrigation plant, whereas some of the others may already be on their year 3, year 4 irrigation. So you may have a little bit of a mixed setup in your landscape. And irrigation's only, such a small part of maintenance. When we want to talk about that's kind of the seasons of irrigation as a landscape grows and what you're offering it in the way of extra support with water that it might not get from regular precipitation, depending on how your landscape is laid out. I'm having a little bit of problems with allergies, so my throat is a little bit sore. I'm sorry, I keep pausing for some water. All right. So when we're looking at other types of maintenance, one of the things we're looking at is things like pruning. And the reasons that we prune is if something is one of these 4 Ds. If it is dead, diseased, damaged, or deranged. If you're going to be removing anything that is truly dead. If there is a limb that is dead and is causing something to be weighted or to be potentially dangerous, you are pruning out disease. If something has been damaged in a variety of ways, you want to remove it. And then deranged is when something has just gone completely off the rails and is, you've gotten co-leaders that are going to split. You've got something that is growing abnormally and is getting in the way of other pieces. You've got something that has different patterns than anticipated or that we should be expecting. Those kinds of things we want to make sure that we're pruning out of a landscape. So there are different kinds of things. When we say pruning or maintenance, there are different types of maintenance. And some of these I've borrowed from an ongoing course that I'm going to talk about at the end. But deadheading flowers is the removal of, like it says, of individual spent flowers or flower clusters. There are plenty of reasons to do this as far as cleaning it up, prolonging flowering season, pulling them off in a way, particularly if you're in an area where you have to be really cautious of your aesthetic and making sure that it appears neat and tidy. There are plenty of reasons to do this, and there are also reasons to leave them in place. And one of the reasons to leave them in place is this is where you get seeds. This is great habitat value. It's where you want the birds to come in. It's, it's the true look of these native plants as well. It's kind of valuing the whole cycle of the native plants. One of the biggest things we hear with native plant landscapes is that they can appear weedy or unkempt. The truth is they can appear in any way we want them to appear. They can give any kind of aesthetic you want to give. But one of the things that helps if you're in an area where it's important for it to appear in a particular way is edging pieces. Making sure things are cut back and making sure your edges and your corners are kept nice and neat goes a long ways towards making sure that it meets considerations for that area. So when we talk about edging, it is really keeping it to the edge of the hardscapes or the corners or the other pieces that you need. When we talk about pruning, this is probably what people think of the most, is removing branches. And I want to talk about, why we remove branches. And this is probably the best example of why we use those 4 Ds. If we're removing things that are dead, that are diseased, any of those pieces, you want to make sure you're doing it and you're doing it well. And particularly if something is diseased, it's not getting enough air, it's getting too much moisture, those different types of things, then you're giving it an opportunity by opening it up, by thinning out pieces to make sure that it has an opportunity to get more light, to get more air, to not collect too much moisture right in that space. And this is a really good example from this graphic here on how you do that when you're doing it. I think we've all, you've probably seen, even if you didn't notice what it was, a piece of where a tree branch had come off and it had ripped down the side of a tree. And when you cut something and you cut into the collar, that's one of the things that can happen. You want to be sure to, let me answer another class real quick. You want to be sure as you cut it to not cut into this ridge area. If you cut into the ridge area, it's more likely to cause long-term problems and long-term disease. And this three-cut idea is to relieve a lot of the pressure there. You do a first cut, which is a smaller piece underneath the so that there's a little bit of space. And as that pressure hits, that pressure should allow it to go down. And then you can do the second cut, which is what allows it to take off the weight. And as you take off the weight, you're going to have the opportunity to pull off a lot of what would happen when it rips down. And that's when you do the third cut. The third cut is what's going to bring it down. And the third cut is what is going to allow you to cut it to where you need for it to be. So that third cut is the important one. And the first two are to get you to that point. Another part of pruning is pinching, removing only the tips and stems of new growth. So it's encouraging fuller growth. It's allowing it to put the energy of that type of a cut in, by pinching it off into growing out, bushier instead of out further. And the other part of pruning is that often we talk about shearing versus pruning. When we think of pruning in a normal landscape, we're often thinking of cutting along hedges or something similar and doing big cuts that kind of go along. We often have electronic pieces that do that, machines. Pruning is the judicious piece of shearing. It is going in and choosing and trimming to remove things in a particular way, possibly to shape them, possibly to bring them into alignment, to remove things that are too dangerous, or for some reason, you need to remove out of the way. One of the other important parts of maintenance is learning your landscape and learning what is good bugs and learning what is bad bugs. And good bugs versus bad bugs includes figuring out your landscape needs and what often is the things that go along with them. If you go to the UCIPM piece, the UCIPM will allow you to look up a particular plant or a particular bug. And you can narrow down then what you're seeing, what you would see on if you have a willow, if you have a ceanothus, what kind of bugs would you see? What kind of disease will you see? And it will take it to an identification point and then to a way that you can actually work with it. It's a super useful website and tool for identifying things and knowing if they're a good bug or a bad bug, or a good problem or not really a problem, just something odd. So I want to talk about what it looks like to look at your landscape as a holistic part when you're setting up a maintenance plan with it. And a maintenance plan for a native plant landscape isn't the same as for a garden where you're setting that has grass and edging and trimming and mowing, where you're often doing it on a required normal piece, where you have to keep your grass to a certain level, and therefore you need people to come in every other week or something like that. Setting up a maintenance plan for a native plant landscape instead is figuring out what that landscape and those plants are going to need, and then finding a way to check in on them on a regular basis. One of the things, oops, I'm going to pop out here and talk about the maintenance plan a little bit more. Oops, sorry. Actually, we'll go here real quick. We're talking about maintenance planning. And along with our partner Theodore Payne Foundation in Southern California, California Native Plant Society has worked on a certified or California Native Plant Landscape certification. It's a training that's available throughout the state. Southern California, the primary lead on it is Theodore Payne Society. In Northern California, the primary lead is California Native Plant Society. Both of us are working with the same training. We are partners in this. And if for any reason there are parts of maintenance that you don't feel comfortable doing or you don't want to take on, it's an opportunity to find people who have deeper training with it. And eventually on Calscape, there's going to be an opportunity to find those people throughout the state. I want to talk a little bit about how Calscape can help you with setting up a maintenance plan, and then where that maintenance plan can go into your landscape. So I'm going to pop out of the slide deck here, go over to Calscape, and you're probably familiar with Calscape at this point. Calscape.org. It has all the native plants in any particular area. If we start with all of them, let me pull out a city here. There are almost 8,000 plants in this database. And you can put in a particular city. I had chosen Oakland to run this list. And in Oakland alone, there are 588 plants. It's still a little bit too much like going to the cereal aisle. There are too many opportunities and options for it. And so you need to narrow it down a little bit. And you can, if you have a list, you can go in and you can put in a plant list and get the same type of out of it. I'm going to pull a plant list real quick in our advanced search just to show you kind of how to do that and then how it can help you with your maintenance. So you can go in here and let's say we choose an annual, perennial, shrubs, trees. We want a basic landscape and we want it to have full shade or full sun or partial shade. We want fast or medium drainage, and we want extremely low water and realistically very easy or moderately easy care. We also want it to be something that has all of the happy things. We want birds and bees and butterflies and hummingbirds. And we want plants that are fairly commonly available. We don't want anything that's not going to fall in love with something that we can't get at a local nursery. So if we go into the advanced search here and we pull all those features, it gives us a variety of plants that meet those needs. And you can go in here to the options. This is where you can add them all to a plant list, or you can export them to a detailed spreadsheet. And I already put this one into a spreadsheet because I want to show you how it'll help you with your planning for your landscape and for your maintenance here. You can go into a California fuchsia or any of these. It will give you what it is, the height it's going to be, the width it's going to be, how quick is it going to grow, what type of flowers will you see and when will you see them. It will also allow you to see things like what are the water requirements. And this is very low or low. And what is your max summer irrigation? So if you have a native plant landscape It's an easy way to put all of the plants that you have into a list like this and start a maintenance plan. You can start with a list from Calscape that'll tell you what kind of soils, what type of time of year you should be seeing your flowers, and then what your summer irrigation will look like. You start there.
Anne
and
Marie,
you-
it's
Yes.
Barb. We can't see the spreadsheet.
Oh, no. Sorry about
It's
that.
probably hiding.
We had tried this out beforehand, but the best laid plans of mice and men. Let me reshare the spreadsheet, and we are going to go back through here. Okay,
There we go.
sorry about that. You know, you try it out and then Murphy laughs. Okay, so I will go back to the beginning part here. So we put in all those plants, we take a look at them, we decide which ones we want, we create a list, and in Calscape it outputs this detailed list. It gives you how big it's going to be, the height, the width, the growth rate, what type of flowers you'll see and when you'll see them. And it even gives you your summer watering requirement. So this is the part where I was talking about using this as a starting list. Put all the plants that you have into a particular list in Calscape, and then it'll send this out for you. So you'll know when you should be looking for irrigation, and when with irrigation, you should be looking to add more summer water, when you're going to be seeing flowers and what you should be doing with them. And it allows you to start setting up a kind of a year-round plan and a maintenance plan for your landscape. Because really you're creating an idea of when you need, what you should be seeing and when. Your maintenance for a native plant landscape is this long-term relationship where you're saying, okay, every season I need to be going out and I need to be checking on. It's not the same thing where you would have with a lawn where it's every other week you need to go out and you need to mow and then edge it. Instead, you're saying every year I need to just readjust my summer water expectations. My landscape has grown in and I need to go take a look at it, and I need to see what's working and what's not working. So when you're setting up a maintenance schedule, you're setting up more like an opportunity to go and look at the maintenance, as opposed to going in and saying this will happen each time. You're not saying I'm going to go and trim all limbs on, October 1st. You're saying October may be a good time in this landscape to go and look and see what limbs need to be trimmed. If you know that you have a lot of, summer flowering plants, you know that at the end of their seasons is when you're going to go out and decide if you're going to pinch them back or deadhead them, or, all the different things that happen at a different time. Putting together a list like this gives you an opportunity to really set up what you should be looking at, when you're expecting it, and what you should be doing with it. It's a good opportunity also, if you are working with a landscaper, to give them a list of what's already in your landscape. And if you have a nursery that you really like, to develop a relationship with them, and therefore you can go out in and say, hey, I need more of this particular kind of plant that I have in my landscape. You've got over here, let's say you have, some California goldenrod, and you want to either replace it, add to it, include it in another part of your yard. You already have it in your list. So maintenance is a relationship not only with your landscape, but with the people that you work with on keeping it healthy. All right, we're going to try switching to another screen share. So I'm going to, rather than trust it's going to do it, we're going to stop, get a little bit dizzy going back here. And then I am going to restart the share. All right. Hopefully that all worked now.
Great. Yep.
Great. Okay, so that's one way Calscape can help you on it. I want to also talk about how Calscape, if it's something that you use on a regular basis, is going to be changing in the coming months. Calscape is a super efficient tool in so many ways. It's got so much information in it. It's got really good data in the background. It's a giant database, basically. However, it's not always intuitive, and it's so powerful, we want to get the most out of it. So CNPS has invested a lot of time into making sure that what comes out this fall is a better, more intuitive product. So you're going to have more ability to search by plants. I just went into that whole thing to go over to the advanced search feature in Calscape. And this part of Calscape will now have it a lot more available to see. It will also have a lot more opportunities to look at plants in a garden situation. Right now, a lot of our plants pictures are really beautifully done, but they're in the wild, and that makes it harder to guess how it would look in your landscape. So we'll be adding a lot of new photos, making it more intuitive to see. You'll be able to get a good description on each plant still. You'll be able to still see its range. You'll still be able to see what co-plantings go along with it and what kind of situation it likes and what kind of maintenance it needs. Oops. I just realized we're seeing the whole slideshow in that version. So we'll go to the big version. That'll make it even easier to see. All right, so you'll be able to see, as I was saying, its range. You'll be able to see the overview, including its situation and plant needs. That will help you to understand its maintenance needs also. If you have a fairly low maintenance yard, you don't want to fall too in love with a high maintenance plant unless you're ready to make that commitment of time and energy. We'll have more pictures of actual gardens on there. People who want to show off their gardens, who would like to have photos up, ones where you can really see how a garden all works together. And some backyard inspirations to give you an idea. If you see a particular plant, if you see a ceanothus that you really like, you'll be able to see it in a garden landscape. Oops. And before I leave that part and go into the last piece and start answering questions, it will also have a marketplace area. And the marketplace area right now on Calscape, you're able to find nurseries. For each plant you go into, you can find what nurseries should be carrying that plant, which nurseries say that they have it at that point. There'll also be the opportunity to find people who work in design, in installation, in maintenance, in tree care or arbor, so that you can, if you need additional support to help your garden to thrive, to install it, to ask questions about what's happening, there'll be people to find who you know work in that. It's one of the biggest questions that we get and that we get phone calls and emails on regularly is how do they find people who work in these fields to help support? And if you're somebody who works in these fields, you'll have an opportunity to put yours up here. And like I talked about, some of these slides and some of this idea comes out of the CNPLC, the California Native Plant Landscaper Certification course. And people who are certified in native plants who have gone through the basic training here will have a mark that they've done that as well. So you'll be able to see that they've invested in their education and can help with your landscape. And if it's something that you're interested in, both Theodore Payne and CNPS have classes available or will be adding classes in the foreseeable future. So I want to take a moment and go through some questions and do some Q&A here. But I also want to make a point of pointing out next month's talk is going to be on connections and how you can make a bigger difference through local work in all kinds of different ways. Things our chapters are doing, things that volunteers are doing, things that activists are doing that help with everything from developing community gardens to doing education, all these different opportunities where it's a bigger community. And then as Barb said, that we have the QR code here. And if you aren't a member and want to join and want to have access to this, you want to say just a couple words on this, Barbara?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the QR code is here. If you don't know how to use a QR code, though, you could also just go to our website, which is cnps.org. If you'd like to join, or if you just want to explore the website and find out more about gardening tips and other things as well. But we certainly would love to have you as a member. And I know our local chapters would love to have a few more members as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in chat or in the Q&A, and I'll try to address them.
Great. Thanks so much. All right. I am going to stop share here and look into our Q&A. All right. And we've got a whole variety of Q&A here to address. Got a question on scientific studies on fire resistance with native plants. And it is a question we get a lot. What plant doesn't burn? It's what plant doesn't burn is a hard one. Every plant can burn. I've seen some fairly large metal sculpture ones that are probably less likely to burn. However, the best studies I've seen on it are Las Politas nursery. If you search Las Politas nursery native plant burn times, that will allow you to go through and check different native plants and how long it takes them to literally to ignite. It must have been a fascinating study to participate in, because he literally went out and took all the different plants and tried to ignite them to get a better understanding of really where they are and what is firescaping in that world. There are other people out there who've done some studies. Greg Rubin has one that comes out of the San Diego region. It's a little more area specific, and there are other people working and training on firescaping. Doug Kent has a book on firescaping, and there are a few others in this field. And there are a lot of good talks. Even though we had a good water year last year, we don't want to take that for granted, and we want to be aware of fire in landscapes. Approaches for dealing with persistent weeds, Bermuda grass, things like that. It is going over it with sheet mulching and re-sheet mulching. It may take a couple of times. It may even take potentially a couple of years. Bermuda grass, ivy, those kinds of things they're going to take a few times. I'm sure people are probably answering all these in the chat too, as I read them out loud, because there's a lot of knowledge deep in the groups that show up to here. And they may have knowledge more specific to your question or to your location. So please, feel free to answer these as well. I'm giving short answers, and if you have an opportunity to look for deeper answers, love to have all that in there as well. The downside of sheet mulching, especially native bees. There is with sheet mulching, one of the things you want to be aware of, sheet mulching shouldn't cover all dirt areas, all open soil. California has 1,600 types of native bees. And it's amazing. And they're so wonderful in so many different ways. They are adorable. They are beautiful. There are all these different kinds in all these different ways. There are ones that look like little fuzzy teddy bears. There are beautiful green shiny ones. And of those 1,600, the vast majority are native ground dwelling bees. And we want to leave, when you're sheet mulching, you want to leave space for them to come into your landscape. They're a super important part of our pollinators, and you want to give them that space as well. That doesn't mean that we completely cover everything. And it doesn't mean that you want them necessarily on your walk paths or things like that. You want to make sure you give good opportunity for them though. And this is, it's in an hour that we're doing this talk. Each of these topics could easily be its own course taught by experts. And so we are going through and getting just a good overview here. So it's hard to go into specifics when you have a quick piece. How do you know if you're overwatering something? There are a couple of, overwatering is actually something that can be a problem with native plants or with any plant. If you're overwatering, you're going to see some things that almost look a little bit like you're underwatering potentially, in that the leaves don't look right. It doesn't look like it's a healthy plant, but your soil is probably much moister more of the time than it should be. You're going to have it might start showing, some fuzzy white spots on it. It's going to look unhealthy and like it could look like it's starting to mold. And to do that, if you're seeing something that's kind of looking sad and pathetic but not crispy, it might be that you're overwatering. Take a look at your soil around it, back the watering off, and then see if you need to lighten it and let in more air and more flow around it as well. You also want to make sure, if you're overwatering, you don't want mulch all the way up around woody bases of plants. You want to make sure that there's a little space there, because it will also potentially trap the moisture against the woody base of the plants. Tips on starting plants from seeds. We have a whole talk on seeds and on starting plants in those ways, and there are some good propagation classes going right now. It's one that we could get into really deep. Let's see. How do we get to these areas on Calscape? Well, right now on Calscape, to get to those areas, if you're on your main pages, you can go into the advanced search, and it's up in the right hand corner. It's a little piece that says advanced search. It will become much more obvious this fall. And you can put in all your factors then, and that will get you to the part where when it looks at options, where you can put it into a list, where you can make plant signs, where you can output details. It's a fun website to really go look around. If you get into a particular plant you like, you can click on a picture and see a bunch of other pictures. Let's see. We have a wish for a spreadsheet is resistance to dog urine, and I'm mostly laughing at that because we just did a class with the city of San Francisco and a lot of their people in groups like Parks and Rec and such. And dog urine resistant plants are actually, a good list of that is on their list as well. It's an important piece that they want added to most everything. Let's see. How does Calscape determine what nurseries carry a particular native plant? It is self-selecting. Nurseries that are on there have put themselves in there. The lists are ones that they should be keeping up to date. So there will be an opportunity for the nurseries to keep it up to date. And if they have it on there, they should have the plant. Next question for one of our more knowledgeable constants here. Will the Northern California Certified Landscape Program have a job posting site similar to SoCal? It will not have a job posting site, but it will have an opportunity for people working in the field to list themselves, to link to their websites, to show off their work, to talk about what they do. Are there ways to apply or simulate fire in the garden? That's a deep question. There are ways, depending on your landscape, places, if you have large landscapes, to do small fire pieces. That's not something we generally recommend. When you are cutting things back, when you're trimming, when you're doing dead, diseased, those types of pieces, you really want to make sure that you are pulling it back, the stuff that would normally be cut by fire. And one of the ways to do that is, if you're going to coppice something, which I didn't go into, because it's really cutting it almost all the way down into the ground. And not every plant is good with that, and it's not the right thing for every plant, but there are plants where that's an important part. And it does kind of simulate if they had been burned to that point. It doesn't do the same thing for the soils. It doesn't do the same thing for nutrients, but good maintenance is, in a smaller landscape, is as close as we normally come to those pieces. I know we're getting close on time here, and I want to reiterate that all of these this is just kind of an overview of so many pieces of topics. The main part is to really get to know your landscape, to learn what it likes and what it doesn't like, to find a nursery near you that can help talk about what you're seeing in your landscape, Usually their people are really knowledgeable and can give you some deep information on your plants or on the things in your landscape. So this will be up, the recording of this will be up in a few days. And you will get an email after this that gives you information on a whole variety of resources, because there are a lot of questions and there's a huge chat that I haven't had an opportunity to see. I want to make sure that we're not getting into them in any kind of preference. It's just that there are plenty of them and it is a very deep topic. A good way to check soil moisture. A good soil meter or a soil probe that will tell you is a really good way to do it. But checking soil can be as much as going out and checking in, depending on how deep your landscape is, either, just below the surface, or getting a soil meter or something that will get you a few inches deeper, because when you're irrigating a plant, you're really irrigating the soil for it to pull up. If you're looking for something to check your soil moisture and you're going to be doing probes with it, pulling up different parts, you want to make sure that you're looking at recommendations from other professionals. I don't have one here, but I'll try and look for one to put in our talk. Let's see. New Calscape changes will be online this fall, and I'm afraid we are running out of time, but we appreciate you being here and we hope to see you in future months. We'll get out all the pieces associated with this in the next few days. And thanks for co-hosting with me, Barb.
Absolutely. This was super fun. And I hope everybody got something out of this. And yeah, come to the next one as well if you can. We'd love to see you in September. Thanks everybody so much. Thanks, Anne-Marie, for the great info.
An hour is only enough to give us a basic overview. There's so much to learn and it's all fun. So thank you all. Good night.
Take care.